Bryan. Nice to see you again. If there's a breach, there's a conversation with Bryan. We should stop meeting like this.
Yeah, good to see you again. And unfortunately, breaches continue and just keep more and more and more. I think the Identity Theft Resource Center said that we're probably about 4 times the level of data that has been breached year to date than we were last year. So
Unbelievable.
it is a problem.
Well, this particular breach that we're talking about is the National Public Data breach. I mean,
Mhm.
they kind of lived up to their name, right? National Public Data. It's now quite public.
Yeah.
I just thought of that actually when I was doing some background work on this. But
Mhm.
just to reprise, 2.9 billion records. The
Mhm.
interesting part about and the scary part about this is that the business of national public data is background checks.
Mhm.
So they are assembling a lot of detail about
Yep.
people, not just their social security number, but employment history, places that they've lived, alias names. I mean, everything that you need kind of ready made to create an identity of a
Yep.
person. But Bryan, how much of that information is really new? I mean, yes, it's startling, but isn't this information already available on the dark web?
I would say a lot of it already is, and it's kind of funny you say that because here I have my letter from United Healthcare, right? And I was part of that breach. And that is the scary bit about all of this. So when I look at, they listed what could have been lifted about me from United Healthcare, and it's everything from every diagnosis I've ever had,
Wow.
medications I take, right
Wow.
down to my driver's license number. And
Oh,
that's what makes it really scary
right.
because if you look at these sites where you can now go steal somebody's identity, you can plug in everything right down to a driver's license number. So you're going to match what the DMV says. So, the scary bit is probably the only thing that this latest breach did was reduce the price to buy this online because, supply
It's
and
not
demand,
right.
right?
Right.
And then I look at this particular breach, and I just got this on August 5th in the mail. This breach happened in February, right?
Mhm.
February 17th to the 20th. And I didn't know about it until, August 5th. I knew it was out there.
Right.
I
But you
didn't
didn't know
know
if
if
it
it was
impacted
my
you.
data, right?
Right. So I was going to ask you a question about that. So if there is all this perfect information out there and the source of truth is the government issued ID, what's
Hmm.
to prevent someone to take my information or your information and get a government issued ID using it? So having a government issued ID that is authentic,
Yep.
using bad data, but passes the typical screening because it represents the source of truth using data that's real.
So I guess the good and the bad thing is the data's out there,
Mm-hmm.
but you need to bring now everything with
Mm-hmm.
you to the DMV.
Right.
You need other sources of identity to do it. So, could somebody go into the DMV and be you? It's getting easier. There's no doubt about that. But I'd also say that, the real thing is it's easier to pretend to be you. Because like you said, when they're doing a background check,
Mm-hmm.
they know all your addresses. And we've all seen this now. It's like you're logging into something and it says, well, which one of these addresses did you ever live at? Well, now they have all that information.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of the stuff that used to be hard to know is now
Right.
becoming prolific and everybody has it and knows it. So, that's why I think, companies like us and other ones that can tell you, how real is this piece of plastic
Yep.
is very, very important because, the supporting knowledge and evidence, that whole knowledge-based questions that you get to see who,
Yep.
if you are who you say you are, the data's out there.
Yep. I've actually failed those because I don't remember.
Yeah, it is funny. I just signed up. I did one the other day, and they actually had my college dorm room on it. So it's just like you never know who's got what, but it's out there. And like you said, when somebody's doing a background check, they know a lot about you. And if that data
Yep.
got hacked, big
Yep.
issue.
So we should assume that all of the data that is available about us is available, and now, frighteningly so, the healthcare data as well. Um, and now we go from protection to being vigilant as
Hmm.
consumers about how we need to think about in acting, acting with businesses that are asking for information from us. How does that shift the conversation that you have with banks and other parties that need to rely on identity for important transactions?
Well, I think it's become, they've got to be preemptive. And I think they're all realizing that. There's so many banks out there that still rely on knowledge-based authentication. My particular bank, they still rely on a black light to check if the ID is real or not, which, maybe makes me think I should change my bank because that just does not work. But, I think that folks are realizing that you need to get in and figure out, can you determine if the plastic is real? And then I also think it's one of the reasons that we're definitely getting a lot of interest in, sharing data because that shared data, how do I create, sort of a score on how real is Bryan, right? Where have we seen him? Does this make sense? There's certain things you can do, like how well am I using the keyboard or whatever, things like that. But does Bryan show up in this type of situation normally? I think what we're going to see is identity is going to become something that everybody has to worry about across every business that you're in. And, I've said this, many times to a lot of people I talk about, if I can get your email, I can change every password you have. And if I can get your social media account, I can destroy you and get you just canceled. So identity isn't just for banking anymore.
Right.
Identity is really for how do we protect ourselves and our reputations.
So what does that mean in practice for places like, I mean, you and I have talked before about real estate transacting. I mean, the big tickets where, the mistakes can be made and the consequences are obviously very dire. We know about account takeover, we know about the impersonation frauds and scams, but what about the pockets of compromise where the stakes are very high, the consequences, as I said, are quite significant?
Yeah, look, one of our partners in the title insurance space just put out something, and it's about $500,000 that they will lose.
Wow.
And if they make a mistake on title and somebody is selling land out from underneath somebody else. So again, everybody needs to be thinking about how do I prove who is who. Now, the data is out there, and what we like is the fact that the data is out there, but the data about what's in that barcode isn't out there. And so far, knock on wood, the bad guys haven't figured it out because it is extremely difficult to figure out, the digital signatures, the subdirectories, all that kind of stuff. So if somebody isn't really checking that, in my mind, they're not doing a really good job to protect you as the consumer. So I personally am starting to think about where do I put my business, my dollars to make sure that they are protecting me, because it is an enormous pain if your identity gets stolen. It takes a long time to fix it and money out of your pocket. So if the businesses you are dealing with aren't caring about it, what we've seen and studies show 30% of the people will leave the business if their identity gets stolen.
But how do you know whether or not the business, so let's suppose your identity hasn't been compromised, or you don't know whether it is. How do you know the businesses that you're dealing with are protecting your identity sufficiently?
It's really hard. What I'd say is, are they doing something like checking some sort of government ID every time you do something? Are they, whether it's in person or over the phone? If when I go and I say I want to cash in a bunch of my points and move them into debit cards or things, to give as gifts or whatever, if they're not checking that's me, then I'm worried about that company. How are they going about? And if you feel like they aren't doing something to prove it's you before they move money or change a password or do anything like that, then I would be concerned. I had to change my cell phone number on my one of my airline accounts, and they checked right out like every step. They kept sending me a text for two-factor authentication. That makes me feel safe. Anybody that's just letting me log in and change anything or call up a call center and change my address or do whatever it is without making sure it's me, that's worrisome.
It's interesting that you say that because I've had to change a profile on an airline account registration that someone else set up for me, and they made a typo.
Uh-huh.
And I went in to try to edit it, and they wouldn't let me. They required a photograph of my driver's license,
Hmm.
and two-factor authentication to actually allow me to make the typo change.
Yeah, and what I would also say is a photo doesn't mean much, right? And that's another thing that, I think we should all start asking, what are you actually doing when you take a photo? You know, all the websites and the dark websites and many of these sites where you can get a fake ID are not on the dark web. They're in the bright web. You can just go see them and they all match perfectly, right? That's the simple thing. And the scary part about it is, machine learning and AI is
Yep.
really good at making sure the holograms and all that kind of stuff is in the right place. So just because it matches doesn't mean it's real, right? The physical
Mm.
plastic is very, very easy to, fabricate. And really the hard bit is, what is encoded in that barcode because the DMVs don't give that out.
Right.
So that's hard to figure out.
Mm-hmm. Are DMVs looking at newer technologies in order to continue to keep their their plastic and then going digital identification secure and out of the realm of what fraudsters can do to try to impersonate it or replicate it?
Yeah, we've been talking to some of the DMVs. Like some of them have, in a way, simpler barcodes than others,
Mhm.
and we're working with them to say, here's how you can kind of beef it up and make it a little bit better. Obviously, the mobile driver's license is something
Right.
that they're looking at to figure out how do we go back to a source of truth. But there although there's a standard, we still have different states doing different things, right? Some are following the standard, some aren't. And, I look at that as something that will take a very long time. It's sort of the same way that when they put the chip in a credit card, it took 10, 12 years before they finally made
Mm.
that mandatory. And I think we'll see the same thing with, the MDL, in 10, 15 years, maybe that will be, the source of all truth. I think that, there's certainly the FIDO standard out there. People are trying to figure out how do I create a token that I can carry around with me that says it is me. But my belief is that certainly, a data consortium where we are putting in together and we can say, a sort of a score. How well can I trust that it's Bryan or not Bryan is going to be I think where we'll end up. The same way that we have credit scores and all those things attached to us, I
Mm.
think we'll end up having identity scores.
And who will provide those scores?
I think it's hopefully us. That's really what I'm looking at and doing because again, it's going to matter. What are the inputs to
Sure.
show, right? How much can we see? What's the standard behavior of Brian, or anybody, and what do we have to back up that says that they're real? And you start off again with the
Yep.
plastic, or the passport or whatever it is, right? Do we start from there and then build around that? And that's really what we're talking to, a lot of our partners about is doing that thing.
I think that makes a lot of sense because you have to have confidence that the person is the person, and you
Yes.
need some way to really measure that. And for
Hmm.
both the relying party and the consumer, herself, because you want to make sure that the party that you're doing business with, as you mentioned, is also taking the appropriate precautions. But,
Yeah.
it also isn't going to turn you away thinking that you're a criminal.
Right. Because, and that, I talk all the time about, fake licenses and that kind of stuff, but you can also go and get, any utility bill, bank statements, they sell those online. So, and again, sort of building up a fake me is very easy to do. But working with other parties to say, here is we trust, right? And we all put it together, and here's my piece, and here's your piece. And when we put that puzzle together, all of us can trust more. I think
Mhm.
is really what's going to happen.
Yep, I think that's right. So, are consumers worried, still worried about this? I ask that because I talk to lots of different people across the ecosystem, and when there's a breach, you do have to offer the mandatory credit monitoring and so forth. And it's surprising how few people sign up. Maybe they already are signed up because of a
Yeah.
prior breach, but do people just kind of brush this off as, yeah, just another thing?
Yeah, I think they're brushing it off. And it was funny because before we got on the call, I was like, hey, remember that giant Equifax breach? And they
Yeah,
had to pay up to
yeah,
$125 for me to get credit monitoring. In this letter, I get nothing. They're like, this is what you should do, right?
wow,
And maybe you should think about locking your credit down. And, and
yeah,
they talk about the problems with locking your credit down and then needing to open it back up. So I think people are just like, okay, it happened. I guess it'll happen to me. I certainly watch my credit. I monitor things
yeah, we
all the
do.
time.
Yep.
And I think anybody who doesn't should, because honestly, I look at it as not if, but when I get my identity stolen. And I think it's just going to happen.
Yep. Vigilance. You have
Yep.
to really, really, you have to be your own advocate. And as you say, check
Yep.
the places where there could be evidence of a compromise.
Because you
And
don't know where it's going to come from,
where it's
right?
going to
So
come
there's,
from. Yep.
and again, this was a company owned by United Healthcare that got hacked, right? And
Mhm.
there's all the places that your data might be that you don't know about that could get hacked. So I honestly just, if you haven't done it, folks, sign up for some sort of free credit monitoring service where they're going to let you know. It might be a day later, but still it's better than not knowing, because the sooner you can get on it, the quicker
Mhm.
you can prove it wasn't you, less time
Mhm.
it's going to take, less money out of your pocket to, stop that crime.
Ryan, are we always going to talk about these breaches? Is this going to be kind of a common theme, no matter whether it's this year, next year, the year after? It's just part of the business climate these days?
Yeah, I think so. Again, we do so much training internally on how not to let somebody in, because it's so much of this isn't the fact that somebody was able to figure out how to like find a crack in your wall. So much of this is people let them in. You
Right.
click on links, you do things like that. So, I look at my DevOps guys and they're really, really good. And I am sure that no matter how strong they are, right, they can protect us, but it's going to be human error if ever
Mhm.
anything were to happen, because somebody is going to click on a link they shouldn't. That's going to let malware in that causes this. So, as good as cybersecurity can be, as good as every DevOps guy can be, it's just, the weakest link will be the human who clicks a button that they shouldn't.
And is there any way to prevent that?
I wish, we send our folks to remedial training because we
We
send
can
them
go
fake
back to an
emails.
analog world.
Yeah, yeah, we send them fake emails, and if they click on it, the screen, and they have to go take another class. So it's there, it happens, and it's just, I think, a fact of life.
Just a fact of life. Wow. All right, Bryan, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, it's a pleasure talking to you as always. Thank you.
See you soon. Bye bye now.